Hey guys, Brian from Boas here. I've been getting a lot of people lately asking me about prices and whether you should negotiate them. So if a seller is selling you a boa, but you're not really happy about the price, should you make a counter offer? Should you just pay the price? What is the etiquette? Things like that. And that's what I'm going to cover in today's video. So the first thing that you want to understand before even thinking about buying a boa, you should have a pretty good idea about the current market prices for different types of boas. And the way that you can determine the market price is to go to one or more of the online classified sites. So we have Morph Market, we have Fauna Classifieds, and we have kingsnake.com. And you can look at what the boas are selling for at any given time. And remember, in many cases these are asking prices, so the selling price might be below that depending upon whether there's negotiation involved. Looking at the prices on these websites will give you a pretty good idea about the current market value of different animals. It'll also give you the examples of the quality of the animals being offered. Sometimes you can go, you might see a boa that claims to be one thing. You look at the picture, it's obvious that it's not. It's just somebody's trying to sell a boa as something else. They may not even know. And I see this a lot with Hog Island Boa. So this right here, this is the pure Sears bloodline Hog Island Boa, bred at my facility from parents, from Vin Russo. I know that this is 100% pure, I have no doubt about it. I've seen so many Hog Island Boas that clearly are not pure Hog Island Boas, and they're being sold as Hog Island Boas. So if you see an animal that claims to be a Hog Island Boa, and maybe the price is really low, but you look at the picture and it's obvious it's not a Hog Island Boa, you know that that's not really a good example. If you're in the boa hobby for any length of time, you'll certainly see that the prices of these animals are constantly changing, going up or down. And it really makes sense to look at these classified ads on a fairly regular basis, just so you can see the direction that the prices are headed. In the last couple years, we've seen the prices of most locality boas have gone up considerably. In fact, with Hog Island Boas and many other island boas, I would say the prices now are probably on the order of about 3 times what they were selling for just a few years ago. It's kind of crazy, but since the pandemic happened, more people keeping reptiles, they have more time for the reptiles, more money to spend on the reptiles. Unfortunately, the supply of these animals hasn't increased even though the demand has, so the price has gone up a lot. And then of course we have the ever-present inflation driving prices of rats, fuel, electricity, and all the other things that it takes to make boas higher and higher every day. So that is also affecting the prices of these boas. When you're making your estimate of the current market price, it's really important that you look at recent classified ads, not older ones, because the prices have changed quite a bit. And one of the websites, Fauna Classifieds, has a unique feature where you can look at what animals were selling for 5, 10, 15 years ago. I think some of the ads go back even 20 years or so when the website was first set up. But it's kind of crazy to see what certain animals were selling for. For example, Hog Island Boas just 10 years ago were selling for around $150 to $200 a piece. Now it's considerably more, probably about 4 times that in some cases for a pure high quality Hog Island Boa. So you just have to make sure you're looking at current information. This is another example of a boa where the price has changed quite a bit in the last few years. This is a Tarahumara Mountain Boa, and these guys have just skyrocketed in popularity over the last few years. With the very low supply and the very high demand, the prices have gone up quite a bit. So if you went back and you looked 5, 6, 7 years ago at the prices on Fauna Classifieds for these guys, you'd see that the current market prices that they're selling for today are probably about 4 times what they were selling for back then. It's kind of crazy. So this guy will be set up for breeding shortly. He actually sired his first litter this year. Hopefully we'll have some more babies from him in 2023. So now that you have a pretty good idea about the market value of the animal that you're interested in, I think it's important to understand how sellers and breeders set the prices. And as someone who's set prices on lots and lots of boas and followed the boa market for close to 20 years now, I have a pretty good idea about how this is done. And there's really 3 main approaches to setting prices of boas. And so the first is probably the most commonly used, and this is the approach that I take. And what you do is you look and carefully follow the market for boas, and you have an idea in your head of the range of the market value, then the way that I just told you how you can determine it by looking at the different reptile classifieds, and you charge somewhere in that range. It's also important to look at what other breeders are charging for similar animals. You want to set your prices very much in line with what other breeders are selling their animals for. And this is the main approach that I take. I want my animals to be available at market value. I don't want them to be available less, because then I run the risk of people flipping them and selling them to someone else at a higher value. And then I need to take in a certain amount of money to continue this operation. It's expensive breeding boas. There's a lot of overhead that you have to cover. And then it's also very risky. You know, for every boa project that I get that succeeds, I probably have one that doesn't. You know, a pairing that didn't work out and I didn't get any babies. And so I got to cover these projects that didn't work out as well. I also have to cover projects that are hopefully going to bear fruition 5 years from now or so. I got to raise up my babies, you know, in order to have future breeders. So you're not just paying the breeder for the boa you're getting, you're paying for the projects that didn't work and for the future projects as well. Okay, so most people, most breeders, myself included, will price boas at market value. There are some people though that kind of push the margin, and these people, they just want to see how much they can try to sell their boa for. Some of these people will sell boas for, you know, some cases 2, 3, even 4 times the market value. Maybe they think their boa is, you know, better quality, or maybe they don't really want to sell. They just want to kind of test the waters. They figure they'll put up the ad. You know, if someone sells it, that's great. They get a windfall of money. If it doesn't sell, that's no problem. They'll just keep it. And I've seen, you know, a few breeders do this. Sometimes they get a negative reaction from people complaining that they're being greedy, or they're trying to, you know, milk every cent out of their boas. But that's their business, you know. I don't think a lot of these people sell the boas at these prices. I think maybe it's the start of the negotiation. Maybe they want to throw out a really high price, and they figure someone will come back at, you know, 2/3 of the price and they can negotiate. But I really can't see them selling too many boas at these prices. I think these people, they just try to push the envelope, and it's kind of interesting. The prices that they were probably charging, you know, 10 years ago that seemed ridiculous, now they seem like bargains. So they're kind of pushing the envelope, and they're kind of moving the direction of the market, so to speak. People, of course, have mixed feelings about this, but this is just how the boa market works. Okay, so then there's a third type of marketing strategy, and this is for people that aren't really into the marketing. They're really into the breeding and keeping. They're not really into the interacting with people. They just basically want to get rid of their boas, their babies, as fast as possible. They want to unload them, sell them. In some cases, they may even sell them to a third-party wholesaler, you know, at a greatly reduced amount. The wholesaler is going to increase the price and sell to the public, but then they don't have to deal with the public and the hassle of selling and shipping and, you know, all that, which, you know, can be kind of stressful sometimes. But what I've seen is that people like this, they typically want to sell the boas as quickly as possible. Typically they'll price below the market. Sometimes they don't establish them very well. They may even sell a boa, you know, the day after it's born, before it's even feeding. So their whole approach is just to sell at a low value or low price, and that way they figure that someone will get a deal, but then the person can do the work at getting the boa established, and they don't have to deal with that. And buying a boa from this type of seller could be a way that you can get a bargain over, you know, a seller that put more work and effort into getting the boas established, but of course it's a higher risk. So if you're going to take this approach, I would say it's better if you already have some experience with boas and getting them set up and established, because if you don't already have much experience with boas, you want to buy a boa that's going to give you the best possibility of success and already be somewhat established by the seller. Okay, at this point you've established the market value of the boa that you're interested in, and you've also established which of the 3 categories of selling strategies the seller will fall under. So the next thing you want to do is look at the individual characteristics of the particular boa and see where it should fall in that range of market values. So of course the quality of every boa is going to be a little bit different. Some of them are going to be higher quality than others, and quality is subjective, okay? Only you can determine which boa is better quality. I get people all the time sending me pictures of boas. Is this good quality? Is this bad quality, etc.? My answer invariably is that's a really nice boa, because I like almost all boas. It's up to you to determine the quality. Look at the picture, decide. Doesn't matter what someone else thinks, doesn't matter what I think, or someone you don't know that's on Facebook who lives 3 states away that you'll never meet in person. It's up to you. So look at the boa, the quality. When people are evaluating quality, typically they'll look at the markings, they'll look at the color, they'll look at the size of the boa, the health, the musculature, etc. They'll compare the boas to pictures of boas in books. Okay, they'll compare the boa to their ideal picture that they have in their head of what, say, a Suriname or Peruvian boa should look like. So it's really subjective. But you want to evaluate the quality of your boa. If you think the boa is really a high quality animal, it's going to be on the higher end of the market value, or even above the market value. It could even be 2 to 3 times higher than the average market value, depending on the type of animal. Another thing you want to look at when determining a fair value is the bloodline of the animal. And sometimes they don't provide the bloodline information. Sometimes they will have some bloodline information, but don't put too much stock into the bloodline. I think people, especially beginners, get way too obsessed with the bloodlines of their animals. Bloodlines are like brands, and I've did a whole video about this, so check it out for more discussion if you're interested. But a bloodline is like a brand, no different than, let's say, Nike or Apple or Mercedes-Benz or any other brand. Basically, the brand will give assurance of quality for that item. Okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better than an item that doesn't have the brand name. And often you'll pay 2 to 3 times the price for a brand name item as you would for a non-brand name item. And you notice I wear these cheap generic t-shirts that cost like $5-6 at my local hardware store. I don't have the word Nike or whatever brand across it, which would make it cost like 4 or 5 times as much. I'm not going to pay extra so I can advertise some multi-billion-dollar company that uses slave labor, but that's a separate can of worms. So bloodlines basically can give quality, or imply quality at least, but just because an animal doesn't have a bloodline doesn't mean that you should overlook it. And often you can get really, really nice animals that are of unknown bloodlines, or maybe it's a smaller breeder who just started their project, doesn't have this big bloodline name. You can get a much better deal. That being said, if you have a bloodline that's synonymous with quality, typically the price would be higher for a particular boa. Often maybe 2, even 3 times higher, depending on the name of the bloodline. But again, don't get obsessed with these bloodlines. Just because your boa has some famous name attached to it doesn't mean it's necessarily better than another boa. But you can be assured that if your boa does have bloodline information, the seller is probably going to want more money for it. And it also implies that the seller has done their homework a little more and kept track of all of this bloodline and pedigree information. Another important thing to take into account is the particular breeder or seller and what their sales terms are and how much support they offer you. Is this a seller who responds to all your questions and gives thorough answers and gives you the information that you need? Or is it one that sends you one-word emails and doesn't really give you the information that you need? Is it a seller that you feel like as a person, even though you've never met them, you've only emailed them? Or is it somebody that you have no idea who they are, and sometimes you have this idea in the back of your head that maybe you're being scammed? All of these things are important. So if your seller is providing you with a really good customer experience and great customer support, you should expect that you should be paying more for that particular boa. Looking at the price, is there anything else thrown in? Does the shipper include shipping in the price, or are they charging extra for shipping? If you're talking about a morph project, does the boa have any hets that might add value to it? Or does the boa not have any hets? Another thing to consider. And then you want to consider how rare the boa is. Many locality boas are really hard to get, and there may be 1 or 2 litters a year in the whole world, if that. So if you miss your opportunity to buy a certain locality boa, it's going to be at least a year before you have another opportunity, and even that is uncertain. So when a boa is available that you really want for your collection and you need for your future breeding goals, you best acquire it at whatever price possible, because it's going to be a long while before you have another opportunity to get that particular boa. It depends upon your breeding projects. Maybe you are not so bent on producing this boa. Maybe if you did produce it, that would be great, but there's other things that you could produce. That's something to consider. But if it's a boa that you really, really want and it's not very often available, it really makes sense to try to get the boa at whatever price when it is available. Now that we have these considerations in mind, we get to the heart of the matter and the answer to the question, should you negotiate the price of your boa? So it's going to come down to what type of seller you're dealing with and how much you want the particular boa. So if the seller you've determined falls into one of these people that just shoot for the moon and price their animals 2 to 3 times higher above the market price without a justified increase in quality, you probably should negotiate the price. This is probably somebody expecting to get a lower offer, and they can use that really high asking price as an anchor point in order to negotiate a favorable price for themselves. If it's a seller that's selling at market value, and particularly if you've seen that their boas seem to be selling, people are buying them at this value, I would say not to negotiate the price. You definitely want to get these boas for your breeding group. If you negotiate with them, you run the risk of somebody else coming along and paying the asking price, and then you miss out on getting that particular boa. You may also offend the particular seller if you offer them too low of a price. I know with many items that sell, it's customary for the sellers or the buyers to throw out a really lowball offer to try to negotiate down. But sometimes if you do this with a boa seller, they're going to take it personally. And I've seen a lot of boa sellers on social media complaining about these people that do that kind of thing. So even though maybe the person is just trying to get a better deal and they're willing to pay a little higher, they throw out this lowball price. It implies that the boa that the seller has is not really worth that much, and the breeders end up taking it personally because they put a lot into their boas, or their pride and soul, and for someone to tell them that they're worth a lot less, it's just they take it personally. So there's another option that I had talked about, which is sellers that they basically just want to sell as quickly as possible, and they actually are selling their animals at below market value because they haven't been properly established or they don't understand the market value. So in those particular situations, I would say if you're comfortable with the situation and you're not weirded out by the fact that the animal's not eating or it's a higher risk, I would say definitely don't negotiate, because these guys are probably going to sell out really quickly. They may even have a flipper come along and buy their whole litter at a reduced value. They can maybe even negotiate the price even lower because they buy the whole litter, and then they're going to turn around and flip it like a month later at 2 to 3 times the price. The other thing is, do you really want to deal with someone that doesn't establish their boas and they're creating a marketplace where animals are being flipped like this? I would say that's kind of questionable. And a lot of people are obsessed about the price of their boas, but we have to remember that the price of the boa itself is probably going to be a small fraction of the lifetime ownership cost of having a boa. So let's say you buy a boa, it costs $500. You might think, well, no, that's quite a bit of money. But really, compared to how much it costs to keep a boa for many years, that might be, a very small drop in the bucket. Let's say it's going to cost you on average another $500 for a proper setup with a cage and heater and accessories for the cage, and then it's going to cost you another $100 to $200 a year for food for your boa, as well as whatever it costs you for electricity to run the heating and or lighting in the enclosure. And then if your boa gets sick, you're going to take it to the vet. Vet bills can easily be a few $100s just for a basic appointment. So over the course of the lifetime of a boa, you're probably going to end up spending, I would say, 10, 20, 30 times the amount that you pay for the price. So if you're talking about the difference between spending $300 on a boa and $500, in the grand scheme of things, that's a small drop in the bucket, the extra $200. And then you also have to look on the investment value. Say you're planning on breeding your boas one day, and if you can spend a little bit of extra for the breeders, for the boas, and get much higher quality animals, they're going to produce higher quality babies, which you can sell for higher amounts. So, even though you might save $200 on a boa if you buy the less expensive one, when it comes time to sell the babies, the higher prices you can charge for the higher quality babies will more than make up for the difference in price for the higher quality breeding stock. So definitely something that you should consider. So those are my thoughts on negotiating the price of your boa with the seller. And I would summarize by saying that for the vast majority of boa transactions in today's market, it probably doesn't make sense to negotiate, and provided the seller is selling at a fair price, you should pay the asking price. Of course, this depends greatly on the particular seller, the quality of the boa, how rare it is, how much you want the boa, etc. So only you can determine the final answer to this question. So I hope you enjoyed the video and found it somewhat helpful. I'd really like to hear your own experiences with negotiating with boa sellers. So if you have an experience, I'd really appreciate it if you would share it in the comments below. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot me a line. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your boas.